Hello and welcome to another SimpleIndex training video. This video we're talking about SimpleIndex's recent implementation of Cloud OCR. And when we say Cloud OCR, in this case we're talking about using Amazon's Textract service that is part of their Amazon Web Services or AWS suite of tools. The implementation we have in SimpleIndex allows us to do some advanced print and handwriting recognition, whether cursive or handprint, forms data extraction, and also some invoice processing. We're looking at the Wiki here, so you have a reference to go back to anytime you need. The Wiki is available under the support tab of any page on the SimpleIndex.com website, so please follow along if you choose. As far as the features of Textract, it is the highest accuracy OCR engine that we're aware of out there. Like I said, it can do both print and cursive handwriting. We can do form fields, even without templates. We'll get into more of that later. And then also we can get like line item data from invoices, very powerful feature. And then finally, it also makes all of the documents get converted to JSON, and you can have coordinates of all the text. So if you're trying to do a more advanced implementation where you're referring back to certain places on the page within your developing process, then that JSON is very useful in that case. The limitations of it, basically, they're pretty minor. We used to have some other problems when it first came out, but you can see those have been struck through. Now we just have only the asynchronous processing is available. There's no offline processing. You do have to have an internet connection for this to work. And then there's a usage fee charged by Amazon for the service. And it varies on which type of document you're doing, and we'll take a look at a little more of that later. But most importantly, before you can do this, you have to have an AWS account. And Amazon makes it pretty easy. We have the links to get you to the right places on their site because AWS is a huge endeavor, but the Textract part's pretty easy to find your way through. So, and I'll actually step through it here now. So basically, this is kind of an overview of it. This is their Textract pricing, and it just kind of describes the different services they have. There's basically these 5 different APIs. So we have the one here that's just a document text, and then we have the analyze document API, and those are the ones where we can do the forms and tables and so on, and SimpleIndex has a specific implementation of each of those, and we'll talk about that as we go along here. But just realize that this is what we're referencing back to, and if you come on down to the bottom of this page here, we actually have the pricing calculator. It'll give you, now this is the US pricing that I'm looking at here, so if you're outside of this region, it'll be different. And there's also a free tier, so you can, if you're using the SimpleIndex 30-day trial, you can also get an Amazon Web Services 3-month trial, and so you can do all of this in what they call free tier. And you can see the limitations on that. So you have 1,000 pages per month if you're doing signatures, which we're not talking about. And then it's 100 pages a month for each other thing here, just as far as testing out. And then finally, we get down to the pricing a little bit. And it's basically quoting it as per 1,000 pages, like in just the document text. So if we're just taking a handwritten document and just converting it into real text and not really doing any extraction from it per se, then per 1,000 pages, it's $1.50. So it's like 0.1 cents per page. And then you can see that with the other things, when we get into forms that we'll talk about a little bit, and then we are also tables possibly, and then invoices, you can see the charges. Some of them stay the same here, queries and tables, but then we go up a little bit as we get into some of these more advanced things that it can do. So moving on from there, like I said, the first thing you got to do is create an AWS account. And they have a getting started page that kind of steps you through it. Just a quick overview. Basically, you're going to set up an account like you would most anywhere. They do ask a little more than you see on like just your common website, an account name, your address, an email address, that kind of thing. And also they do require a phone number. And then when you create the AWS account, we have the specifics here. They're going to verify that email. They're going to verify that phone number. You'll get the account set up, and that initial account that you set up, you're what is called a root user, and that's the user that has the power to do everything within AWS. So they highly recommend that you create an administrative user, so somebody with a little less capability, and that'll be the user that you do all of the setting up of these credentials we're going to talk about in a moment. So if we look on down here, they do also offer multi-factor authentication, of course. Highly recommended that you do that, but it is optional actually. And then finally, we do create that administrator user. So let's look at actually getting the credentials. This is kind of the important part that lets SimpleIndex talk to the Textract service in the cloud. So they call it using long-term credentials. That's the option that we're using within SimpleIndex. And so again, create the AWS account like we just said. Create your IAM user. That's going to be that administrative user. And that's the person that will create the credentials underneath that. So we're a little more restricted user. And then you have your access keys. And it walks you through that. You're just going to click on a security credentials page. create access keys, and there's a couple of steps there. And then at the end, it gives you a CSV file. And the CSV file is the actual credentials that we're going to need in SimpleIndex. They're showing here how you can update your shared credentials file. I'll look at that in just a moment. But we actually have kind of saved you the trouble of this step where you can just directly in SimpleIndex enter these credentials. Makes things a little bit easier. But if you are doing a very large deployment of this, if you need to put it on a lot of users' computers, in that case, it would be quicker to actually create this AWS folder, this credentials folder that's described, and then just copy that to each machine into their individual user folders instead of having to sit down at each machine and put the credentials in through SimpleIndex in the 3 windows. But once you have these credentials in SimpleIndex, let's take a look here. I've got a job open that's just going to do a full page OCR conversion of just some handwritten letters. And if we go into the job settings for this and we take a look at the OCR options, we'll see that we have some options here as far as which engine it's using. And so in that case, we're going to actually choose AWS Text. And you see that the AWS Creds button is illuminated now. We can use that. So if I go in here, it's going to ask us for the region. And that's going to be, for us, it's US-East-1. Again, if you're in a different part of the world, you'll have a different region that you put in there. And we move on through. And then next we have the AWS Access ID key. So if you remember, when we stepped through earlier, Amazon is going to give us a CSV file that has the Access ID key. So we would go and get this value right here. And then you would copy and paste that into the SimpleIndex interface right there. We hit OK. And then we also have a secret key. There we go. Copy that back into SimpleIndex. Enter our secret key. And then, lastly, it's going to ask where we're storing that file. So this is the user profile that it's going to. And then OK. And that'll create that credentials in the user folder on your Windows machine. In the user folder, there'll be a .aws folder created by SimpleIndex that has the region, which is in a config file, and the credentials, which are in a credentials file. And again, these are things that you can create outside of SimpleIndex and actually just move that folder into the user profiles for each one of your users that are using SimpleIndex. Okay, so now that we have our credentials entered and SimpleIndex can talk to the Amazon cloud, we're going to actually need to set up some fields that use this Amazon service for doing the OCR process. So like I said, in this job, we're just doing some full text conversion of a handwritten note. And so if you look at the choices here in the OCR engine, we have the AWS Text, we have AWS Forms, we have AWS Invoices. We'll look at all 3. But first, let's just talk about how we use the text process where we're just converting an entire page to text. We don't have to necessarily set up any fields for it because we're just bringing in a file. We want to convert it. We want to save it out. So in that case, we just enable full page OCR and we have AWS Text selected. And that's really all there is to it as far as the settings. Up here in our indexing and file naming, we're just bringing in the file name that's associated with the file right now, and we're going to save that back out. That's the same file name it's going to get on the backside. And in our file output, you have the traditional options of the JPEG and TIFF and what have you. And let's actually just put it PDF. People really like the PDFs, and that gives us another thing we can take a look at in just a moment. And we'll save out of this. Okay. Yes. Go back in here. And so when we run this job, it's going to bring in any images that are in the input folder and load the OCR engine, communicate up with that AWS Textract service, and do a conversion for us. And there it is. So here we have this handwritten piece of paper, and then you can see over here in the text box. So you can see here that it has converted all the text on that page. And it's done a reasonably good job. Handwriting is always the hardest thing. It's going to stay that way, but you can see that we've got a really good conversion here. And then we can take this a step further. So let's redock that. Let's go ahead and save this page. That's everything that we have in this particular batch. So let's release the batch. And now if I go look at the output folder, there it is, saved as a PDF file. Also, we have the output, the full page OCR as a TXT file. So that's enabled here as well. So we get both. But actually, if I go into this PDF, and here it is, but you notice that my text cursor has come up. Let's zoom in a little bit here. And I can actually go in and highlight some of this text. So if we want to just get right here, you can see that it's actually highlighting individual words. So this PDF has that text layer now, whereas before it was just an image. I brought in a JPEG file, no text in there at all. So if we go right here and just grab, say, that, for example, and I'm just going to copy them and bring back up that notepad, And we'll paste here, and you can see, dear friend, okay, we got an X wrong. But you understand the process. It can actually make it a full text document. And, you know, I can go in, if I need to pull the text out of it, or I want to use that TXT file, either way, I can go in and edit what's in there, of course. And you'll notice here, if we're being honest, that A really does look like an X, so it's hard to fault the OCR engine for that. Let's take a look at some other ways we can use this program, though. Just a sec. All right, through the miracle of video editing, I've jumped back to the SimpleIndex Wiki, and we're going to take a look at another way to use this. We're still going to be using the text engine on this one, but I just wanted to show you that further down in the Wiki, we do have the three implementations that SimpleIndex has. We have the AWS Forms engine, and when we talk about that, essentially, it brings back what it calls key pairs, key value pairs. And so you give it a key. What's the piece of text on the page? Name, colon, for example. And then it's going to find that anywhere on the page and return the value that's in there. So that's a key value pair. And then lastly, we have the Invoice engine. Almost works the same way. It's still doing the key value pair, but in this case, Amazon has already built into their Forms engine a lot of standardized terms. So vendor names, totals, receiver address, that kind of thing. They're already built in. So rather than having to give it a specific tag that is the key, it just looks at an invoice and pretty much knows what to look for on an invoice, because they've fed it thousands and thousands of pages and just taught it what to look for in these situations. So let's go back over to the SimpleIndex, and I've loaded up a new job here. This one is, again, in this one we're going to do a full text conversion, and then we're going to use some tools that are already built into SimpleIndex, have always been there. So if we look at the indexing and file naming, basically we're going to say from our OCR, we're on AWS Text, we're going to say take all that text, look through it, and find me a serial number that's going to have this pattern at the beginning of that field. It's the phrase serial NO followed by so many numbers, or it's the phrase serial NO followed by a lower count of numbers. Those are the two choices. Then we're also looking for a date, and SimpleIndex is a standard recognition template for finding dates, just % date %. So let's go ahead and let this job run. We're going to cancel out of here. And here we go. So again, we're just bringing in the forms that are in the input folder, and we're going to load that OCR engine, talk to the cloud again, and process these docs. And remember, this one's just doing a full text conversion, so we're not actually giving it any reference names to look for as far as telling the cloud to do that. Now, we are using SimpleIndex's options for doing that. So you can see we found a serial number, we found the date, and that was just using that matching that we were talking about. Just looking at full text. We're not using the forms capability just yet, but we'll take a look at that in just a moment. And so you can see, we always step through here and we can see that it caught all of these and so on. And then we can, of course, release the batch. It'll save out those PDFs, save out our index data with them as far as using them as the file names, and also could write to a database if we needed to use this in any other purposes within the company. All right, once again, I have loaded a new job into SimpleIndex, but we're going to be using the same form. So you see the form that we were using in the last job, and in this particular job, we're actually going to look for a lot more of these fields, but we're going to do it using the forms capability of AWS with those key value pairs that we were talking about over on the wiki. So let's look at that job. We're going to go into the settings here. And so if we go to the OCR, we can see we're now set to AWS Forms. And then if we look at our indexes, you can see we're capturing a lot of fields here. And the way you do it with the AWS Forms is we're going to use this %AWS% and then a pipe character, and we're going to give it the key that we're looking for on the page. What's the tag on the page? It says client name : and then we can put another pipe, so if there's multiple terms, it might just be client name if the engine doesn't see the colon, for example. So we just give it client name as a second option. Same here with the phone, serial number. We have a couple different ways that can do with the colon and without the colon. You can see that just kind of continues on. But it's always AWS in the first position, a pipe, and at least one term that's on the page. And then if we need a synonym for that term, we can put a second option there, and a third, and a fourth, and so on if we needed to do more like that. So let's cancel out of here and actually run this job and see what it does for us. So again, there was a full page conversion on this, but it just goes in now and looks for those key value pairs. So let's take a look. We'll float this tab out here again. So you can see here, rather than having the full text of the document come back, we actually have the key value pairs as it's labeled here. So we have the address, we have the CHV phone number, we have the client phone number, and it's just looking for the values that follow that in each case. And then over here in our index fields, we can see that's exactly what it brought back. So we've got Beth Sutton, we've got the right phone, we've got serial number, etc. on down the line. And so it's a very similar thing as far as what we were doing a minute ago, but in that one we were using SimpleIndex's tags for finding something within the full page text of a document. Here we're using the AWS Forms capability with those key value pairs. All right, so that's how we do the AWS Forms capability. That still leaves us with the invoices. So let's take a look at another job and we'll see how that is set up to use the Invoice Textract service. All right, so here I have loaded our last demonstration job for working with invoices. Here's a sample of what we're going to be working with. There's a few invoices in our input folder. You can see just a traditional invoice. We have an invoice number, we have a date, of course we have who it's from, shipping addresses, that kind of thing, PO, etc. So let's move out of here and let's go take a look at how that job is set up. So if we go into our options once more, we'll go to OCR and we'll see that we're on AWS Invoice. And then if we go to the indexing and file naming, we'll see that things are a little bit different here. We're just kind of giving it the tags here of vendor name, invoice received. And you notice that these aren't the specific names of the field that we were looking at on there. These are just the tags that are within the AWS Invoice service, the kinds of things that it already knows how to look for. So again, we use our %AWS% and a pipe, and then just these terms that are part of the AWS system. So let's back out here and run this job. And the beauty of doing something like this is, of course, invoices, every one from every vendor looks completely different than the one before it. So this is a more general approach that lets you look for a vendor name wherever it might be and whether it just has, in fact, a vendor name isn't going to have the word name in front of it. It's just going to say the name of the vendor. And so this invoice capability knows how to distinguish those things on a page. This is the actual vendor name, this is the bill to, the ship to, etc. So when it brings these in, it's going to identify all of that. And again, it's done that conversion, but then it's applied that logic that's built into the AWS Invoice API, and it looks for the values that we've assigned to it. So you can see here, let's zoom in on this guy a little bit. And then we have the vendor. We have the invoice number captured from here. We have who it's being billed to. We have who it's being shipped to. And then you can see all the fields are just filled in here, including some line item data. So we captured the first line item out of this, and it just has that whole description right there. And then we also have the amount, and it understands that it's not going to pick up this value. It actually needs to get the dollar amount of the 4 of those right here. So that's how it brings back that data. So that really kind of does it for covering the cloud OCR using the Amazon Web Services Textract service. And remember, what we talked about is you have to get your credentials from Amazon, plug those into SimpleIndex, or create that credentials file in your user folder. And then once you've done that, inside SimpleIndex, you can use one of the 3 engines. Remember, we had the AWS Text, we had the AWS Forms, and we had the AWS Invoice. And when you use the AWS Text, that can be a basic one like we saw in the first, where we're just taking a handwritten letter and converting all of that into full text just to have a document that has the full text in it. We can also use it with the traditional SimpleIndex tools as far as finding names, finding dates, that sort of thing. And so it takes that full text and just looks for the term that you give it and then finds what is associated with that. Taking that a little further, you can use the AWS Forms engine, where you can give it those key value pairs. You tell it the field name and whether, and that's particularly useful. In the ones we saw in the first case, the client name, that sort of thing, those values were very close to the word, so it knew exactly where to look. And especially when they're next to the word, that's the easiest way for OCR to kind of process this. With the forms, it's a smarter capability, and it knows we're looking for the term client name, but we're just going to find, it might be below it, might be off to the side, but it understands how that form is laid out and can find the values that go in each of the fields. And then lastly, we had the AWS Invoice engine. And in that case, we're able to give it standardized keys, vendor name, receiver address, invoice date, that sort of thing. And it just knows how to analyze an invoice page and find all those terms and bring them back appropriately. So of course, we're always here to help. The wiki's available. You can email us on support@simpleindex.com. If you have any questions, please do get in touch, because we want to make this easy for everyone. Thanks for watching.